Hi, I'm Trish from TrishNewbery.com, PDF Sewing Patterns, and welcome to the sew along for the Balaclava hood. So this Balaclava hood is great for, I use mine under a ski helmet. It's a great winter pattern for under any sort of snow sports helmet if you just want to wear it. It's really cute as a Halloween costume for an assassin's hood. Sort of goes along with that assassin's hoodie type thing. And for this pattern, what I'm suggesting, because it is going to cover your face, you need to look for fabrics that are going to breathe. So I have suggested pretty much just something like a merino wool, so 100% wool, something that's going to let you move and not get sweaty and still be able to breathe. Now, saying that, pretty much any fabric that has got at least the minimum stretch percentage, which I think I've said is 50% horizontally, and you need at least a minimal vertical, just be aware of what you're going to use this for. You could use a French terry, you could use a polar fleece, but if you're using it for sports, those fabrics with polyesters, some of them aren't the best at wicking, which means taking the moisture away from your skin, so they might end up making you feel quite clammy and sweaty. So just be warned. 100% cotton would be fine too, but of course if you're wearing cotton in winter, that could get cold and make you colder. So it really depends on your end use, the fabric that you're going to use. I'm using merino wool for this. I have tried this out in a lighter weight merino nylon blend, which is called a new yarn, and it worked fine. So now I'm going to try this out in a heavier weight merino wool. So this is around about a 210 220 weight. It's reasonably heavy, and we'll see how this one comes out. So it doesn't take a lot of fabric. All the details are on that information sheet. Now you don't need to sew this with the machines I'm sewing today. You can use a regular sewing machine. The seam allowances are 6mm, 1/4 of an inch, so if you're using a regular sewing machine, choose a lightning bolt stitch or a zigzag and sew at 6mm, 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to use self fabric binding. So if you've got a cover stitcher, you could use a cover stitcher for the binding. You can use fold over elastic just with your regular sewing machine, and for those hems I suggest you use a twin needle on your regular sewing machine, and I've got a video on how to use a twin needle for hemming, and also how to attach your fold over elastic. So as I said, fold over elastic is fine. I'm going to use self fabric binding. So you're probably wondering what a cover stitch machine is. A cover stitch machine is pretty much like an elaborate twin needle. The difference with this machine is I've just installed a binder attachment, so instead of attaching fold over elastic, I'm going to attach binding to my garment. Now for the main part of the garment, I'm going to use a serger with my overlock stitch. Same thing again, you don't have to have a serger, you can use those stitches on your sewing machine. Just make sure you test everything before you begin, and let's just get straight into it. Oh, one thing is we are going to jump between machines quite a lot with the construction sequence, but it is a pretty quick sew. Go ahead and plug your iron in and make sure you test your iron before you start. You're going to find it easier to do a lot of these hems by pressing them in place before you stitch. So I'm going to sew view A. So view A has an overlap to allow, well, so you can drink. There's a mouth opening in view A, and view B there isn't. So for view A, take the upper part like this, and at the notch position here, which is our hem, press under your hem allowance. So that's 1.5 centimeters, and I'll put what that is in inches just below. And then if you're using a twin needle, you can twin needle this. If you're using a cover stitcher like me, cover stitch, and just stitch that into place from side to side. take your lower centre front and you'll notice there's 2 notches on the side. The hem notch is the first one, so turn at that hem notch position and press that into place, and then we're going to twin needle or cover stitch that in as well. Okay, so take the top piece and place it on top of the bottom piece so that the upper one laps over. So what we want is we want the fold to pretty much hide our cover stitching. So we want the fold here to match to the second notch at the side. And I'd like you to either hold that in place with a pin, or if you'd like to, and if you do pin, make sure you pin within that seam allowance. Or if you'd like to, the other thing you can do is just tack stitch that into place to make sure that holds in the correct position. Okay, so now we've got view A pretty much out of the way because the rest of the construction is the same as for view B. So this is where our tongue can come through, or we can take a drink if we need to. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to use my serger to create an overlocking stitch. If you don't want to use a serger or you don't have access to one, you can choose one of the stitches on your regular sewing machine. A zigzag is fine, a lightning bolt is possibly better. Just remember we're going to sew at 6mm. So take this lower centre front piece. Now if you're sewing view B, this will all be one piece. And we're going to sew the sides to it. So this is what our sides look like. So now we're looking for the straight edge. So right sides together, place that to the piece we've just created. And you'll notice part way down there's a notch, and that notch will match to the folded edge that we just pinned together. So when you're ready, just serge one side and then the other side. And I should have mentioned, when we serge overlock, we're not going to cut any fabric off, we're just going to use that blade to tidy up our fabric. Now once you've done one side, like so, go ahead and repeat on the other side. Now go to your iron and press that so the seams face away from the centre, and it doesn't matter which view you're sewing. Okay, so we're going to bind or put our fold over elastic on the top edge, but just put this aside for now and we'll start working on the upper part. Here is the upper centre part, so you'll notice it goes from small to larger. So the larger part is the neck edge. So we just want to work on the face opening, the forehead part at the moment, which is this more rectangular shaped end. So just bear that in mind. And here are the side pieces as well, and we have a pair of those. So there's two mirrors, one's been cut like this and one's been cut like this. So we're going to sew that centre piece to this big curve here, and we have notches to match as we go down. But just for the time being, we only want to sew this part way. We only want to sew this as far as just past the second notch. So, right sides together, take this piece, and what we want to do is hold it like this and match from here down, and you'll see that there are notches there and notches there. So just overlock down past that second notch and then overlock off, and then we'll do the same thing on the other side. So now it's time to attach your fold over elastic, or if you're like me, I'm going to use a self fabric binding. So what I've done here is I've just set up my cover stitcher with a binding attachment. So this is going to give me a 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch finished bind. But this is exactly the same thing as if you're going to use fold over elastic. So take the lower piece, and we want to attach our binding or our fold over elastic on along this upper edge. On the pattern piece it's marked bind, right from one side to the other. And then on the piece we just sewed, we want to do the same for this piece here, right along and through to the other side. Oh, and I should probably say this is a single fold bind I'm doing. So I've already pinned the other side, but what we're going to do is come to this curved centre piece here. This is right side up at the moment. And on one side you'll see notches. So there's a notch just up from the hem, and then there's another notch there, and clearly that's where we overlocked off. Okay. So take the lower front piece, come to the edge of it, and start matching notches. So what we're looking for is we want the bottom to just overlap slightly with a triangle, which is pretty normal when you're sewing angular pieces together. As you go up you'll see that that notch will match there, and then the next notch is to show us the position of the top of our binding there. Okay. So once you have those in position, what we're going to do now is fold the top piece back down on top of it and repin. So the next notch down from where we finished our overlocking will match to the top of that fold and the other notch. So just repin that. We want to create a bit of a sandwich. And then as we come down, the other end of the binding will match to the notches there. So when you've pinned both of those sides into place, so you can see it's sort of coming together here, like so. So just go up to where you overlocked off and just start by overlapping that a small way. So I'm going to come back up 3 or 4 centimetres, inch and a half, and just make sure my edges are together. Just go over what you did slightly and then keep sewing. So now we're going to transition to multiple layers, so just be careful, go slow, and don't forget to take out your pins. Continue stitching, making sure you have the 3 layers. So you can tidy up that join whichever way you want. I'm just going to snip mine off, and that's what we have here. And so do the same thing on the other side. So if you do have any of that fold over elastic or binding hanging off the edge, you can either cut it off with your blade, or what I've done is just cut it off in line with the fabric, just continuing the line. Our next step is the hem. So on every seam around the bottom edge you'll see a small notch, and that shows us our hem turn position, which is 1.5 centimetres or 9/16 of an inch. So what I'm going to do is press this all up to the wrong side. And then when you're ready, you can either stitch that into place with a cover stitch or with a twin needle on a regular sewing machine. So it's a good idea to not start from the front, just start from one side or of the other of the centre back seam. Right, for the very last step in our process, we need to stitch the side down to the, so the lower front down to the upper front, otherwise it's just going to hang down too low all the time. You can leave it down if you want, but this is an easy way of keeping it up. Now when you cut this pattern out, you would have noticed 2 notches said beside them chalk only, so hopefully you can still see that chalk, hopefully you've chalked in enough. So they said chalk only because what we're going to do is, here is the chalk mark on my lower piece and here is the chalk mark on my upper piece, and what we want to do is just match these as best we can. So you want to follow your chalk line up to the edge and then match that position like so. We'll do that on both sides, but what we want to do now is we want to stitch these layers together. Now you need to do it just in the single layer, so you sort of got to squidgy this fabric. Might be easier if you turn it inside out underneath your plate, underneath your presser foot, sorry. So get to that position where those notches cross over. And all we're going to do now is choose one of your twin needle or your cover stitch lines, and I'm going to choose the uppermost one. And making sure there's a jersey or a stretch needle in here, we're going to stitch those down. So we just want to stitch those 2 layers together, and you want to do a small back tack. Make sure your stitch length is slightly longer than normal. Do a small back tack and then just gently pull that out until it's sitting flat, and stitch on top of the existing stitching. And then back tack when you get to that seam. So this is what we want to do. We want to hold those 2 layers together. Now when you've done that on one side, go ahead and do it on the other side as well. So find that chalk mark there, find that chalk mark there, and match the position and hold it in place. You can use a clip. And then for this one I might stitch it the opposite way, from there to there. Just make sure you've only got that single layer. Well, it's 2 layers, but you don't want to catch any of the other fabric apart from the upper and lower. And just back tag that together, and then making sure that is in the correct position, slightly stretch it out and stitch. Now you might prefer to use a chain stitch on a cover stitch if you have, and definitely use your zigzag or your lightning bolt stitch if you're using a regular sewing machine. You need some sort of stretch stitch to stop that from snapping. So there we have it, our garment is finished. Now if you are like me and using a cover stitch binder, clearly my tensions were slightly off here. You shouldn't be having any of that, pulling. It should be nice and smooth, but I'll know that for next time. And thank you for joining me with the sew along video. I hope you enjoyed this, and thanks as always for buying my patterns. I really appreciate you supporting a small business. And if you haven't done already, please hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and don't forget to join my Facebook pattern discussion groups where you can see what the latest happenings are and you can share your makes. And I hope to see you back again soon for my next sew along video.